This is Ken Smith reminding you it happened today, March 30th, but the year was 1814. The Napoleonic Wars had continued for years, leaving the name Napoleon as a terror who swept across Europe. But on this day, the forces of Europe marched into Paris and defeated Napoleon. It was also on this day, 1858, some things we don't consider. For example, the eraser on the top of a pencil was patented today in Philadelphia. The year was 1867. Alaska was purchased from Russia for $7.2 million, roughly 2 cents an acre. It was this day, 1870, that the 15th Amendment to the Constitution is adopted. And what did it do? It guaranteed the right to vote, regardless of race. It was on this day, 1870, that Texas becomes the last Confederate state to be readmitted to the Union after the Civil War. March 30th, 1959, the Dalai Lama flees China and is granted political asylum in India. It was on this day a picture was taken, 1967, the cover picture of the Beatles album, Sgt. Pepper's. It was on this day, 1981, that President Ronald Reagan was shot and wounded in an assassination attempt by John Hinckley. This day, 1981, a movie opens, Chariots of Fire. It would win the 1982 Best Picture of the Year. This was a good day in 1984 when a waitress, Phyllis Penzo, was given half of a lottery ticket by a New York police detective, Robert Cunningham. The next day, they win $6 million. It was on this day, 1992, Silence of the Lamb is selected as Best Picture of the Year. And some lives are changed in a moment. On this day, 2001, a 15-year-old American swimmer, Michael Phelps, breaks the 200-meter butterfly world record and lives with that fame to this day. This day is March 30th, 2020. President Trump asks Americans to continue social distancing until April 30th. Officials warned that tens of or even hundreds of thousands of Americans could die if we do not self-isolate and distance. He reminds us that April is going to be a hard month. Public officials agree that remaining in our homes is the best way to weather the coming month and to see a plateauing of the virus. There are about 300,000 churches today in the United States. Virtually all of them are closed for Sunday worship. But not all of them are closed. Congregants in some of the mega churches, for example, in Louisiana, the Life Tabernacle Church, remains open on Sunday, with more than 550 parishioners attending. It is true, though, it's about half of the attendance from last week. The River Church in Tampa, Florida, with several thousands, also have held services this past Sunday and continue to plan to have worship, even in the face of all of the reports of the spreading of the virus. Another church, the Solid Rock Church in Lebanon, Ohio, 3,500 members, is planning to continue worship. Other churches, most of them, the large mega churches, have opted out of in-person services. Joel Osteen, the nation's best-known mega church pastor, held services and plans until the ban is lifted for services to be held online and streaming. The Christian response to pandemics begins with the words of Jesus, his most famous words, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." It was Jesus who said, "Love your neighbor as yourself. Greater love has no man than this, that he would lay down his life for his friends." The Christian church is completely linked, especially in the early centuries, with pandemics, with plagues, with the spreading of viruses. In the 2nd century, the Roman Empire faced a plague, a pandemic. In the end, almost 1/4 of the Roman Empire would succumb to the virus. It was Christians who cared for the sick during those times of plague, taught something that people had never fully understood, that the plague, the pandemic, was not the result of a God who was punishing them, but instead it was the product of a very broken world. Pandemics occurred again in the 3rd century. In 1527, the bubonic plague struck Europe. Martin Luther refused the calls to flee from the city and to protect himself. Rather, he stayed and ministered to the sick. The refusal to flee cost the life of his daughter, Elizabeth. He wrote a tract, Whether Christians Should Flee the Plague. He says, we Christians die at our posts. Christian doctors cannot abandon their hospitals. Christian governors cannot flee their districts. Christian pastors cannot abandon their congregations. The plague does not dissolve our duties. So said Martin Luther, 1527. There was another part of the essay, though, that was quite detailed. In it, he encouraged believers to obey quarantine orders, to fumigate their houses, and to take every precaution to avoid spreading the sickness. The Christian motive for hygiene and sanitation does not arise from the motive of self-preservation, but rather in the teaching of Jesus. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love your neighbor as yourself. Greater love has no man than this. This is Ken Smith reminding you it happened today, March 30th.